There are good films, and there are bad films. There are Hollywood films, and then there are those abstract films. And then there are those bizarre films out there that utterly defy description. And with this, we have something like 1973's Godmonster of Indian Flats, the film we'll be looking at today on Weird Cinema.
Highly potent form of technique. Harder the brain. And introduced into a human body by Chinese acupuncture techniques could result in the formation of deadly figures.
Come on, some sort of adolescent stuff, any parade.
Make them all pay! Make them pay! Make them all pay! Dan, run them down!
A movie so strange that it captures the imagination and it boggles the mind. By most measurements, Godmonster of Indian Flats is probably considered to be a bad movie.
You kids get the hell out. I can't let you meet here anymore. It's too dangerous.
Let's get out of here, Mariposa.
The construction of the plot lacks focus. As a monster movie, it's fairly generic, and any social criticisms packed into the film might seem cliché to modern audiences.
I know the name. How do you do, sir?
Welcome, Mr. Barnstable.
Thank you.
Mr. Barnstable.
When sitting down to watch it for the first time, you're likely to walk away a little confused. Well, a lot confused.
Genus Ovis bovidae, closely allied to Ovis aries. However, domestic sheep's wool appears to be growing only on lower portions of face and body.
In fact, your mind isn't going to know how to handle it. An acid trip on film disguised as a monster movie about a giant sheep. The movie we're talking about comes from a very special place. Directed by an artisan named Frederic Hobbs, the history surrounding this filmmaker and this movie, his last feature film, is something that has seldom been written about, but it certainly deserves its own spotlight. For this episode, we'll be relying heavily on the article Who's the Ghostest with the Mostest from the book Nightmare USA, compiled by Stephen Thrower. Although more sources are to be used, this book is highly recommended and has the most information out there about this subject. And for full disclosure, many of the other sources out there that speak heavily about Hobbs and his background have not been heavily vetted. So take some of this information with a grain of salt.
Maldo, this kid's trying to cause trouble. He's interrupting our music.
He tried to pawn me, Mr. Maldo. Then he calls me a thief. Says I stole his lousy few bucks.
You are a liar. You're all a bunch of animals in here.
We don't treat ladies like that up here. We're civilized. We don't tolerate anarchy.
Frederic Hobbs, full name Charles Frederic Hobbs, was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania on December 30th, 1931. He earned his BA in history from Cornell University, spent some time serving as an officer in the Air Force, and even attended the prestigious Royal Academy of Fine Arts of San Fernando in Madrid, Spain. An academy famous for its alumni, which included Pablo Picasso and Salvador Dali. From the 1950s and onward, Hobbs' work focused on environmental concepts, for which he tried to showcase the spirituality of nature, as well as the man-made. Working in various artistic areas, Hobbs could be seen as a Renaissance man of sorts. He apparently even made waves for his mix of sculpted work with automobiles, moving his artwork out of the showcases and out onto the highways. So how did this man of art end up making a movie about a giant mutated sheep? Hobbs' early artistic work has been described as expressionistic ponderings on the aforementioned environmental issues, as well as a religious infatuation, particularly with pagan and ancient religions. In fact, Rolling Stone once compared his art and called it an offspring of Goya's The Sleep of Reason. And in 1969, Hobbs moved from painting and sculpting and took on the world of motion pictures when he created his first feature film, Troika. Unfortunately, today, Troika is a bit of a lost film. It is said that it once aired on PBS sometime in the 1970s, but there's no verification for this claim. Hobbs himself owns a copy, and there's apparently a copy of this epic somewhere in the UC Berkeley Media Library, but if you didn't actually see the film on the big screen, then you might never see it. Supposedly the film was another psychedelic oddity from the director and told a 3-part story that was part comedy and featured an 8-foot-tall bug man who led a civilization of blue-colored creatures. To quote the New York Times when describing Troika, "Heaven help anybody who wanders in cold on a new experimental art film titled Troika, which opened yesterday at the Orleans and Pacific East theaters. Art or no art, this is one movie goodie requiring a full bag of popcorn, at least half a pack of cigarettes, and somewhere in between a tranquilizer. Add, if possible, a pair of dark glasses and 2 wads of ear cotton, and you'll be all set for something truly different." Believe it or not, in his time, Hobbs' early films were often associated with the works of Federico Fellini and French New Wave filmmakers. There was certainly reason to make the comparison, as Hobbs did manage to produce a certain amount of style, and he was every bit a rule breaker. However, unlike Fellini or Godard, Hobbs also proved to be interested in the entertainment side of the business. This is ever present in his second feature, Roseland. Another low-budget art film, this one details the rise and fall of Adam Wainwright, an entertainer known for his singing and dancing abilities, who one day becomes far too infatuated with voyeurism and pornography. After singing a dirty number called "You Can't Fuck Around with Love" on the Ed Sullivan Show, Adam becomes the Black Bandit who goes around thieving pornographic films. Sound pretty ridiculous? It is.
You may be shy, you may be high, you make it or you blow it on your very first try. You rich or poor, the law or whore, a PhD, a bloody bore. But you cannot fuck around with love.
The movie itself is either a psychedelic trip into absurd satire, with Hobbs skewering modern morality, or it's a drug-fueled trip into self-indulgence that seems as if it was greatly improvised and features its nudity almost entirely to sell tickets. Maybe it's a bit of both worlds. Either way, the movie is so over the top and jumps around so often that it's easy to see why this movie isn't as well known as 8½.
Right on!
Hello, darling, and welcome to Thriller Video. Yes, it's me again, that video beauty with a cute little booty, Elvira, Mistress of the Dark. And I've got a great movie for you tonight. Great, that is, if you're into surrealism.
Surrealism's in. Surrealism's where it's at.
Oh, then you are gonna love this movie. Boy, I tell you, it has got everything. Ghosts, robots, vampires, voodoo.
And vanishing elephants.
Oh yeah, and vanishing elephants, not to mention drooling idiots. Tonight's movie is called Alabama's Ghost.
Up until this point, we've mentioned Hobbs alongside the likes of Fellini and Dali. But it's so bizarre to think that this filmmaker, who was once thought to be an outsider artist, would tackle content that seems so, well, campy and absurd.
While storm clouds gathered over Europe in the years before the war, Hitler's most brilliant and renowned young scientist, Dr. Kirsten Caligula, vanished suddenly from her laboratory in Berlin. World press received unconfirmed reports that Dr. Caligula, an expert in robot technology, had been dispatched to Calcutta, India, on a top-secret mission for the Fuhrer himself. Her orders? To interview the world-famed magician and spiritualist, Carter the Great, at his mountain retreat near Calcutta. There to study his most recent discovery, a rare super substance known as raw zeta. It was rumored among scientists of the time that Carter's substance resembled a highly potent form of hashish, known as cartoon khaki. Other authoritative sources in the Far East reported that raw zeta, when refined electronically and introduced into a human body by Chinese acupuncture techniques, could result in the formation of deadly zeta. In his last public statement, Carter warned that any mortal wired to deadly zeta could be used as a broadcasting catalyst to enslave all humans within the sound of his voice, thus becoming an unwitting tool for the most diabolical forces of evil known to man.
Dr. Caligula. Screenwriting on par with that of Blackenstein. Perhaps this is Hobbs at his most satirical. Or perhaps this was just an artist trying to make some money while also delivering a film that interested him. Because for sure, Alabama's Ghost is about as far from safe filmmaking as one could get. The story focuses on everyman, Alabama, who works at the Magic Cellar, a real-life nightclub that focuses on jazz music and magic ads in San Francisco. While driving a forklift, Alabama accidentally runs into a wall, breaking into the long-lost crypt of Carter the Great. Inside, he finds the tools of this old magician, as well as the hashish mentioned in the prologue.
Yeah, old Carter knew where it was at.
He later smokes the hashish with a vampire man pretending to be the sister of Carter the Great.
Come on, Granny, stop giving me all this jive.
And then more vampires show up. There are tribal voodoo men, there's an elephant, and even a robot that shows up late in the movie. This is most certainly Frederic Hobbs at his most unhinged. For the most part, the story follows a rags to riches formula, with Alabama finding his ability as a magician. But things slowly start to derail the more we see the ghost of Carter show up.
Were you just telling? I am afraid of no white racist ghost.
Then, during the final 20 minutes, things go absolutely insane as a secret conspiracy unravels that includes a conveyor belt serving as a feeding trough for vampires. Plot becomes secondary, as the only thing that ultimately matters is the utter chaos that erupts from the screen. This is something that becomes even more of a factor in Hobbs' final film. Now, before we talk about Hobbs' final film, let's talk a bit about geography and history. So what is the Comstock lode? This was a lode of silver ore that was present under Mount Davidson within the Virginia Range found in Nevada. Originally discovered in 1859, there came a very sudden silver rush to the area that saw mining camps set up everywhere. So why bring all this up? Because in 1978, Hobbs, along with Warren Hinkle, wrote a book about it called The Richest Place on Earth. He had owned a hotel in Virginia City, Nevada, and has had a long and storied history with the city in which Godmonster of Indian Flats takes place. So after completing Alabama's Ghost, but before the film went out to release, Hobbs signed a 3-picture contract with producer Robert S. Brimson for 3 more films. Each film was to have a $200,000 budget, and Hobbs was going to have a percentage of the film's profits as well. However, when Alabama's Ghost was released and was a commercial failure, Brimson and the rest of the financial backers did not want to go through with the deal. They agreed on 1 more film, but with a scaled-back budget of $130,000. Ultimately, the movie that they would get, Godmonster of Indian Flats, would cost $135,000, with Hobbs pitching in for the rest of the budget out of his own salary. With 1 more shot, Hobbs confined himself and wrote the script for The Secret of Silverdale, the working title for Godmonster of Indian Flats, and worked on pre-production for 6 months and had the movie completed within 1 year. So, Hobbs needed something successful. He needed a movie that would have mass appeal. He needed another horror movie. In the early 1970s, horror movies had not yet moved into the world of grim realism. This was before the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in '74 or the Friday the 13th series would come taking over for the 80s. There were still plenty of vampire, werewolf, and general creature features being made. Coming off of his own absurdly unique foray into the world of ghosts and vampires, Hobbs decided to try and create a creature of his own imagination, using stories that he had heard of in Virginia City about monsters that were rumored to have been found in the mines during the days of the Silver Rush. He decided to try and imagine what sort of creature a miner might have imagined. As Hobbs points out in his interview in Nightmare USA, The miners of Virginia City were men who were becoming wealthy and who had plenty of income to spend, and it just so happens that Virginia City was the type of town that had around 30 to 40 saloons in a 4-block radius. So what would a drunken miner in the late 1800s have been terrorized by? With plenty of sheep wandering around the terrain in those days, why not a gigantic mutant sheep? If you make anything big enough and ugly enough, it'll be scary, right? Right? The movie was shot in Virginia City, which was a ghost town turned tourist attraction located outside of Reno, Nevada. An interesting place that has a mini celebration during the summer known as Bonanza Day, where the locals dress up in Western costumes, a fact that Hobbs was well aware of and intended to focus on with his film. Giving off a bizarre atmosphere, Godmonster of Indian Flats features characters who are dressed for a century in which they don't belong, and Hobbs never tries to acknowledge or give reason for any of this. They say that explanations are the traitor of art, and I would say that Hobbs has to be a firm believer in this. Christopher Brooks, star of Alabama's Ghost, returns to work with Hobbs yet again. Brooks was originally part of the Magic Theater, an avant-garde theater group originally based out of the University of California. The same group were known for numerous well-known plays and featured a revolving door of performers who included the likes of Danny Glover, Ed Harris, Sean Penn, and Woody Harrelson. E. Kerrigan Prescott, star of Roseland, also returns to work with Hobbs. Another Bay Area actor, Prescott taught drama at UC Berkeley in the early 1960s, but originally came from Oregon. He had bit parts in various movies such as 1958's Fiend Without a Face, as well as various television programs throughout his career. And Godmonster of Indian Flats stands out as the one and only film from Frederic Hobbs that has legitimate distribution and an official DVD release. That DVD release comes from Something Weird Video, that great defender of the bizarre, but by being a random monster movie in their filmography, it has led to viewers walking away with a very different opinion of Hobbs than the art community once thought of this man. It's a movie that on its surface level seems to make zero sense. Now, at this point in our episode, I am going to go into great detail about Godmonster of Indian Flats. I want to dissect much of the film and try to give out as much information as I have attained regarding the movie. In doing this, some things are going to end up spoiled, but I will do my best to try and let this wonderfully strange movie retain as much of its mystery as I can.
It's incredible.
We're given a plot that focuses on a young man named Eddie, who leaves his life as a sheep herder in order to take part in the adventures found in the gambling town of Reno. His arrival is probably one of the best shots of the film, as we see Eddie escape from the back of a truck that he apparently hitchhiked in. During his ride from the country, we're treated to the blissful theme music of the film, as well as the annoying bleating of sheep. But as soon as the truck moves past, we see the massive Reno sign behind this character, and the soundtrack explodes into a cacophony of sound. A beautiful juxtaposition of where this country boy is from and where he has arrived. As the character moves from Reno straight into Virginia City, we're given the reverse. You see, Eddie hits it big in Reno and begins to party with some Virginia City locals who devise a plan to bring young Eddie back with them.
Let's go on up to the Comstock for a party. How about it, folks? Let's go up to Virginia City!
During the ride, the film tries to explain some history about the Comstock lode, but it's so brief that viewers aren't likely to recall this description later in the story, and they wouldn't be faulted for having some confusion.
A lot of deserted-looking mountains.
Listen, honey. These old mountains helped the Union pay for the war against the South. Why, 100 years ago, this Comstock lode was crawling with miners from all over the world. Billions came out of the ground every month. Guess people living in the Comstock nowadays kind of wish they could go back. You know, living in the past ain't so bad when you think about it.
Another interesting tidbit during this conversation is how Hobbs points out the backwards nature of this town. When Eddie arrives, he finds that his friends are thieves, and he's had the last of his earnings stolen. This ultimately leads to a confrontation with Philip Moldove, a sexually ambiguous character who works for the town bigwig, Silverdale. This, of course, leads to Eddie being beaten and let out of the bar. The film cuts directly to Eddie in the car with Professor Clemens, again played by E. Kerrigan Prescott. The Clemens character is the head of the anthropology department at the University of Reno, and this gives Eddie some time to explain his life as a sheep herder.
I wanted to go to the university, but I had to stay and work on Dad's sheep ranch. small.
Professor Clemens drives Eddie back to his farm. Where this is, we're not sure. The film establishes some messy geography. We've been given the previous exposition about Virginia City, we've seen the town of Reno, and now Professor Clemens would apparently easily drive Eddie back to his own farm. So if Eddie lives around Virginia City, why did he arrive in Reno and immediately head back with a group of strangers? Why does everyone in Virginia City cheat him and treat him like a stranger? Why is he such a stranger to Professor Clemens? Regardless, when Eddie arrives home, he sleeps with his sheep and we see a bizarre vision of lights. This is presumably the birth of our giant sheep monster. The next morning we meet Mariposa, who is traveling with Professor Clemens to check on Eddie. They have a fascinating conversation about the people who beat Eddie up.
Friends of Silverdale's are all members of a secret society.
The 601 came into existence in 1870. Pretty effective brand of frontier justice. But Silverdale wouldn't be mixed up in anything violent. After all, his money restored half the town.
What a bizarre historical name drop. It's a line that I've looked over numerous times while watching the film, but upon investigating it fits in perfectly with Hobbs' interest in California and Nevada-based history. The 601 were a vigilante group based out of Bodie, California, and their title stood for 6 feet under, 0 trials, and 1 rope. The most famous event related to this group came when a Comstock miner named Thomas Treloar had an altercation with a man named Joseph DeRoque. There are differing versions of the story, but ultimately it comes down to the fact the miner felt that Joseph DeRoque had attempted something with his wife. This led to an incident that saw Joseph DeRoque shooting the miner in the back of the head, killing him immediately. Ultimately, the 601 took law into their own hands, and DeRoque was later lynched. Some say taken directly from the police officer's jail cell. Does this have much to do with our film? Well, it does come back into play. Eddie awakens the next day in a terrible fright, while also apparently sleeping next to a bizarre sheep embryo of gigantic proportions. Professor Clemens hardly seems all that shocked, and they bring Eddie as well as the embryo back to his lab in Indian Flats. Following this, we meet Silverdale, who has a gathering of the minds with Moldove. This sequence establishes Silverdale's distrust of quote-unquote tourists.
However, you might be interested to see some of our local citizens up early, soliciting the tourist dollar.
The audience is gently introduced to the character Barnstable, and the movie opens up a door that at first seems to lean towards the character of Silverdale being a racist old white man with power, but never really seems to fully commit to the idea.
I hope I do not appear rude, but your world is so far removed from mine. I have dedicated my life to the restoration of this famous Bonanza Citadel.
The film showcases a war between Barnstable, a young and confident African-American businessman who is in Virginia City for a mining company that is interested in buying all of Silverdale's assets, and of course Silverdale himself, who is an old white man that leads a town full of people who dress like slave owners. But somehow race is never actually brought up. This is despite people in town obviously having problems with the physical appearance of Barnstable. His appearance in parties provides unease to all the locals, but apparently it's simply because he is a quote-unquote tourist. As it turns out, Professor Clemens has a theory that some sort of cellular realignment has been taking place within the surrounding area. Within the old mines surrounding Virginia City, he has located some strange fossil imprints that point towards mutated animal hybrids, similar to the cocoon-esque embryo that Eddie woke up next to and that now hibernates in a black pressurized box. While the war between Barnstable and Silverdale heats up, for some godforsaken reason, we discover that Moldove frequently checks in with the man who runs the local garbage dump, and he asks if anything curious has been thrown away. The man reports rags that look and smell weird that have been dumped by Professor Clemens, and then these two act way too excited to see what Clemens is dumping into the trash pile at that very minute. At this point, it would be perfectly understandable to question your own sanity.
Hike down the canyon, Mariposa.
When Eddie basically describes a miraculous conception of the embryo, you'll no longer question your sanity. You'll absolutely abandon it.
When I had this vision, it seemed like the whole sky opened up, filling the barn with gold dust, and the sheep started moaning and spinning around my head. And I looked up, and the sky was on fire. Oh, it was beautiful. like in the Bible. And then this little thing was born, screaming before my eyes, lit up so bright it blinded me.
It's around the 30-minute mark where Godmonster of Indian Flats is no longer operating on logical storytelling. After seeing the film so many times, even I have trouble discerning whether it's maniacal genius or inept storytelling. Regardless, without going into the movie's plot beat by beat, the highlights see Barnstable being falsely accused of murdering a dog while firing his gun at a shooting gallery, which sees the town putting on a massive funeral for the dog, including a wonderful eulogy.
This is a sad time for us all. For Sheriff Gordon, and for myself personally. I feel a deep sense of loss as a child confronted with the dark mystery of death. He was only a dog, but he filled our lives with joy and gaiety until a bullet struck him down. I ask you now to join me in a moment of silence for our friend.
And also the whimpering of a ghost dog that is very much still alive somewhere else in a neighboring town.
He's a fine dog. I shipped him down to my nephew in Albuquerque. You'll like it down there. Gonna miss him, though.
Emissary from the right...
No, I didn't add that sound effect. That's in the movie. Around the 1 hour mark, our embryo hatches and goes on a rampage. This is the part of the movie that is generally most remembered. We finally see the monster up close and personal, and it can be a little underwhelming. We've got a monster that looks like it was made of plaster Paris with lots of wool. This is probably the weakest link in the entire film, as it causes viewers to entirely have one specific view for it. In fact, this one poorly designed monster, and the decision to show it in full within the movie, especially in broad daylight, has essentially painted the picture of what most people imagine Frederic Hobbs' cinema is all about. While this is all going on, in our other major subplot, the 601 throwaway line near the beginning of the movie finally comes back into play. In the story, Moldove has wrongfully accused the character of Barnstable of attempted murder, and meanwhile he has led the 601 into dressing up and preparing to enact their vengeance upon him. Now, once again, I remind you that we're dealing with characters who dress like they're in 1800s attire, and they're now preparing to reenact the LaRoque story in many ways. They're going to take a man away from his prison cell and hang him. If Hobbs had hoped that his casting would be perhaps post-racial, some of these decisions come across as being a little odd. God help us, then this happens.
What is it? Don't be frightened. I've been following you all the way from the glory hole. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm your friend. You've got to have food and care. You'll never survive up here alone. Come on. Follow me. Come on. Down the mountain where you'll be warm and safe with me. Come on.
The sheep runs amok. Finally, there's the finale, a culminating event that is radically abstract, bizarre, and completely outrageous. So much happens within the final 15 minutes of this film, with the climax seemingly being placed on fast track. Logic has been toyed with throughout, but in the final minutes, the movie jumps ship. Hobbs takes the movie directly into the world of Jodorowsky. Seemingly, the movie is an indictment of capitalism, greed, and corporate exploitation of nature, but ultimately it's a movie about madness. And what happens to Barnstable and Silverdale? Silverdale ends up reopening the mines through the company that hired Barnstable, but does so on his own terms, while also releasing Barnstable from jail with no charges. Apparently, Silverdale, who laments the past, has hopes to open the old mines, creating a new bonanza period. So, once again, we're left scratching our heads. Why didn't he just do business with Barnstable in the first place? The final scene is chaos on Earth. With a town meeting at the dump, Silverdale presents the creature with plans of opening up a zoo that will provide the town with ample amounts of tourist money. As Silverdale attempts to give his speech, Professor Clemens and Eddie heckle him, proclaiming Silverdale to be a liar, which of course leads the town folk to literally go insane.
And will release news of its discovery to the outside world in due course. Now we may expect more visitors to Silverdale County, but revenues from tourism will more than make up for the inconvenience.
You're not going to make a circus out of an important scientific discovery, Silverdale. I'll protest. Shut up!
And I have more good news. We have received a cable from Rupert Reich himself offering unlimited funds in the common interest of conservation. And for our first project, Reich will restore the old Silver Queen and Yellow Jacket mines to their original working order as an historical monument.
He sold us all out.
It's a trick. He's lying.
Can't you people see what's happening?
And the Sun Mountain Railroad will run again on golden rails built by a new...
This leads to an abrupt civil war between all characters in the film that sees the populace push the creature down the side of a mountain as Silverdale, who at first protests but then seems to join in on the unmitigated chaos.
We are the custodians of an era! In hope, signal, weekdays! I have dedicated my life to the restoration of this famous bonanza citadel!
Get away from the children! Watch out!
Everybody, run! The truck's full of gas! It'll explode!
Monster! An eye for an eye! Violence in the name of justice controls the masses! It always has! Do you hear me, Barnstable? I've beaten you! Time is the eternal judge of events! Do you hear me, Barnstable?
What do these final words really mean? What is the meaning of all this violence? Your interpretation is as good as anyone's. There is something to be said about frontier justice, greed, American violence, as well as human nature, but in the years since the film's release, I believe few have come up with a sufficient understanding of the film. Ultimately, the true question in regards to Frederic C. Hobbs has little to do with what his films represent. Instead, the question is about the filmmaker himself. What were his intentions? The first theory is that he was a misunderstood artist who tried to produce groundbreaking film that carried his artistic insights, but he felt prodded to attempt to create commercial properties that could support themselves financially. The second theory is the more common one, the idea that he was simply an Ed Wood-esque character who made inept exploitation features. As a viewer, I tend to look at him more as the former rather than the latter, but it's up to you, the viewer. Regardless of your ultimate opinion, there's no doubt that these films are wholly unique and worthy of your time. If you don't mind the farm animals, that is.